All right, so I'm really excited to be bringing you the new episode of What's New in Adaptive Physical Education on assessment. I was able to get a assessment panel from the 45th National APE Conference in California. Great group of people, and I really think that they're great. Lots of information. So if you go on the blog, though, too, you can also see another presentation I did on how and why to create a podcast in physical education, which I think is a great thing to check out. And the other thing I want to quickly discuss, it's been a while since I've been on here, and I currently have some lost files, and they will be retrieved. I just haven't had the time to take my computer in from the Denton podcast. So if you notice, let's get in there right away. This podcast can be broken up into 3 different assessment pieces, so I hope you enjoy. Take care. The way that I hope that this comes is it becomes, we're here right now, we're getting our professional development right now and learning from one another, but being APE specialists, sometimes we're so siloed and we're in areas all by ourselves, and I hope that podcasts are a way to reach us, to connect us another way on a more regular basis. We look at trying just to uncover some of the different questions of what is adaptive physical education, what is the importance, what is the benefits, and how do we best implement it on this podcast. And I try to make the panels up of special ed teachers, APE teachers. I've had nonprofit directors, authors. I've had parents on here as well. So I try to get a diverse group of people on the podcast to discuss some of those topics. Today, though, we're going to talk about assessment and the state of assessment in our field of APE, some of the different options you have as well. So I want to introduce everyone that I have on the panel. Right now I put Dr. Lisa Silliman French up first. She's my chair on my committee as a doctoral student. So she's the one that I care about the most. So she's the most important person on the panel. All right.
Okay, he's done.
Okay, I'm done. Okay, I'm making her blush. But she's an APE professor at Texas Women's University, as well as she used to be a special ed and APE coordinator in the city of Denton. And she specializes in assessment and has also made our state manual for APE in the state of Texas. So, welcome, Doctor.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. You gotta. Oh. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. All right, and then I have Dr. Barry LeVay, who's also been a past panelist on behavior management, which was a really successful podcast that we've had as far as listeners go. And he's a professor, California State University in the Department of Kinesiology, and I know that he's a big person in just getting this conference running, as well as everyone I've talked to at this conference. This is my first time at this conference, which I've been amazed with. Everyone seems to know who Dr. LeVay is, so he seems to be the man of the hour here.
I don't know if that's good, but...
So then we have Catherine Russell, who we just met.
Yes.
And she is a special ed administrator, but a former APE specialist.
Correct.
And vice principal, and then principal, and now special ed coordinator right here, correct?
Correct, and for Los Angeles County Office of Ed.
Yes, and I think that's an interesting story right there, because I don't think we get enough of our APE people to take some of those administrative roles sometimes. So I think that's a very unique perspective. I don't know if she's the boss of anyone here, but anybody?
No.
Okay.
Not this year.
Not this year. Okay. She's also, and you presented here at the 30th and the 40th?
Yes, I was the program chair for the 30th and the conference director for the 40th, along with Dr. LeVay and Dr. Verteber. Johnny Verteber, the audience.
And last but not least, we have Marcy Pope, who, oh wow, okay. I know, you're showing up, everyone. Okay. She's an AP specialist for charter schools in Chico, as well as she is a co-director for the Northern California APE Consortium and a lecturer at California State, which is Chico, correct?
Correct.
Yes, I'm learning the new California language as well. So this is the panel, and I'm really, really excited. I got some really great experts here. We're going to talk about assessment. Everyone calm down, all right? Calm down. You're getting too wild. All right, so we're going to get started, and we're just going to run right into it. Oh, and a few things for the audience. While we're making the podcast, I'm already recording it right now. If you all can keep it to a whisper, I think you're all doing a great job, but we could pick some of that stuff up, and I might not be able to edit it for later. As well as at the end, we are going to ask questions. So if you have any questions that you want to grill them on. My first question about assessment is, why is it needed for APE specialists? What is the importance of assessment specifically for APE specialists?
Well, I'll start since I'm the oldest. Okay. Anyway, no, I think, one of the things when you think assessment, and I think every AP teacher would agree, I want to meet the individual needs of my students that I'm working with, and I want to be an effective teacher with my students and motivate them. And so what better way through assessment that drives everything? That's where you start. If you really want to know the individual needs of your students, you start with assessment. So I would say that's why assessment, and also we'll probably get into this later, assessment is really multifaceted, and there's a lot of aspects to assessment. And I think initially a lot of people think, well, I'll learn a couple of standardized assessment tools and I'll be good to go, but it's much more than that. It's very multifaceted, and there's a lot of aspects that we're going to be talking about today regarding assessment. So I think it just drives everything. It's where we start if we want to know the child best.
I was going to add that it drives what I do with the kiddo. So that's basically why I need to assess. This was Marcy Pope.
And Kathy Russell. It also, once the student has been identified with a disability, it's what drives assessing for their needs. So it's crucial in the sense of determining exactly where their deficits are and what they need to do and what services they might require. So it's really critical that the adapted PE teacher know assessments and be very well versed in them, because this is how we get into getting the service.
I'm going to jump in already and start interrupting you all. So you said it drives instruction, and I hear that a lot, and I like in the podcast to try to break some of those barriers from higher ed to sometimes what we're doing. We say that it drives instruction, but how does that actually happen?
I would say what comes to mind is, first of all, if you're assessing a student, then it's one thing to test a student and collect data. It's another thing to interpret the data and make decisions about how you're going to provide appropriate instruction. So drive means interpreting the data to make non-biased decisions about the students you're going to work with. So that's how I would interpret drive.
This is Marcy, and for me, drive means finding out those individual characteristics about the student, like their strengths or where their needs may be, so that as I'm choosing what types of service that child is going to get, all of that can come into play. So drive is just the very beginning to choose which path we're going to take as we progress with possible service.
It's hard to elaborate any more than what the panel has already said. This is Lisa. They said everything. The only thing I could really add is it's the foundation. It's the foundation for their present level of academic achievement and functional performance. And it builds our goals, objectives / benchmarks to direct us on which way we're going to go with our students. And you start understanding the student more than just Dr. LeVay mentioned that sometimes we just skip this. Many people skip the assessment part and they just write in anything and place our students, and that happens, but you don't know the student, and we're making decisions. So those decisions that we make with our students after we assess them are extremely important. So to me, assessment is probably one of the most important things we do in our jobs.
I just want to reinforce what Lisa said. This is Barry. About it's the foundation, and also in this day and age, are the decisions you're making, are they defensible? And if they are defensible, it should be based on sound assessment. So I think that's really important, and that word foundation is a good one to remember.
So let's break that down a little bit, because I think we're talking, and I started it out very generic. Why assess? But what are some of the areas that we as APE teachers need to assess? And what is there levels of different importance of the areas that we need to assess as APE specialists. Talking physical, affective.
Well, of course, I think we need to follow our guidelines based on IDEIA, and that really gives us our foundation on what we're supposed to be doing. And sometimes we trickle out, and I believe that cognitive and affective are secondary. They go hand in hand. That's part of our job. It's in any subject area. We're always improving self-concept. We're always increasing cognition. So that to me is secondary. So I believe that we should focus on the foundation and idea, what we're supposed to be assessing, and then it's individualized. So if they're secondary, then we need to focus on maybe developing authentic assessments, that's fine. More fitness, lifetime stuff, that's great. Elementary, we're building fundamental gross motor skills. I just think, as we know, those are the areas I believe we should be focusing on.
What I would share is what Lisa said is IDEA, and so the first thing I'd look at is what's the definition of physical education under IDEA? Is it, gross motor skills, physical and health-related fitness, fundamental motor skills, lead-up games and sports, leisure, and, we should also be thinking top-down and what do they need as far as they get older. And so that would be the first way I'd answer that question. But I also would say that the unique contribution we make is in the motor domain, and no other area, can make that claim. And so we need to stress that. Like Lisa said, social is important, affective domain certainly, and cognitive. But what we do that's unique and where we can make important inroads, and we need to share that with the parents, is that what we do is the motor domain.
So
a healthy lifestyle.
I think that's important, the motor domain, but sometimes when I go and I talk to other fields, if I talk to other special ed practitioners, they don't seem to care about that domain, and they care about the social and cognitive domain. And so then for assessment and for us as APE specialists, do we try to bridge that gap, or do we try to and show them that the motor is important through assessment, or do we try to raise our ability in the cognitive and social domain?
Well, we really want to be assessing the whole child. So this is really an area that is included, is the motor ability. If they can't sit in their chair to attend for a lesson in classroom, we need to take a look at why and how we need to assist with that. They have to have that physical activity. Research shows all the benefits of physical activity and learning in the classroom. And so to miss that one piece, we would not be giving them educational benefit from their assessment. We would not be looking at the whole child and seeing truly where their areas of need are based on their suspected disability.
Mrs. Berry, the way I would respond to that is I would give them examples. When we're looking at health-related fitness, what's more fundamental than that is that, being physically fit so that you can attend, like Kathy was saying, to the tasks that you're supposed to be doing. Functional skills. Do you have the strength to open a door? And so you've got to make the parents understand that's part of our job, is to advocate and make them understand what is physical education. Many of them don't know. I've had many parents sit across from me and say, I want my kid to be social. Well, what's more social than sharing and engaging in cooperative activities in physical education?
I like to add the beauty of our position or professional position. When we come to the table, we're bringing a strong, Barry said, a motor aspect to the team. So it's a team approach. So maybe we're going to need a school psychologist or to bring into more of the effective add. So the beauty of that is we're bringing our strong points to the table, the motor aspect. We're not leaving behind the affective and cognitive part. We're not leaving it, but we're not the front end of it. We're motor, and then the other person. So that's what I love about this field, is we're a team. So I always believe in the philosophy that you're never going to go down alone. Don't go down alone. Don't think you have it all covered as yourself. Always go down with the team or go up with the team. So always stay with the team.
So with going with the social and cognitive, because I think this sometimes it gets a little fuzzy to me, when and why would we assess for social and cognitive and not the motor aspect, or paired with the motor rather than just motor?
We're lucky, this is Marcy, and we're lucky here in California to have the California Content Standards in Physical Education, and they contain all aspects, the motor aspect, the cognitive aspect, and that affective piece. And so through assessment, we're not just looking at the motor tests that are provided for us as formal assessment tools, but we can also use the standards as a way to assess, to see how they're fitting with their grade level peers.
I guess another way to respond to that would also be looking at the child's behavior as from a social standpoint, as the behavior impeding their ability to perform skills. And so we have to, look at the whole child, like Kathy is saying, and behavior can really affect, movement. I knew it would be only a matter of time before I got that plug in for behavior, right? Okay.
I think that when we assess, there are assessments that do ask us how are they doing with their peers and are they team sports and stuff. So they're available and they're generally just check-offs, on our side of the house. And there's really nice articles that are out there that adaptive PE teachers use all over the United States, that really nice collaborative sheets for that, Scott. I think we can bring that to the table, but I think my opinion is we should always team up with somebody else. If you need more information on with a physical therapist, team up with them. Write the IEP together. If you need a behavior specialist, team up with the behavior specialist and get that input so you can work together with the physical educator and the behavioral therapist and yourself to help that child in or out of the physical education setting, whatever the most appropriate setting is for them to grow in those areas.
In the end, what you want is a multidisciplinary report. And so you want all team members involved on it. There are some assessments that do ask those questions about how is the child doing when you're testing them on a given day. How are you looking at the child? Were they having a bad day? Were they cooperative? Were they able to response? And so those things can be key because you can be assessing a student on a given day and they're checked out or you don't have the rapport with them or there's something along those lines that you're not going to get the best score when you're testing them. So you have to take those things into account when you're assessing them as to all factors that are influencing your assessment, environmental, socially, cognitively, the whole piece.
I think, what we're really reinforcing here, you're hearing everybody on the panel say how important collaboration is, and many teachers early in their career, they might be reluctant to go to other people that have expertise, and we can't know everything about that child, and so we've got to be willing to go to that PT or OT. I was very fortunate to work on a motor team early in my career when I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I learned a lot from PTs and OTs about the child, and I think you have to look at it from a collaborative standpoint and not be afraid to ask questions of other people who that's what they do, that's their expertise.
So I'm going to start I want to talk a little bit about legislation now and go on to that really fun piece. So let's start federally and what are the guidelines right now? What are the rights of students and parents right now about assessment and then maybe specifically for APE? And is there really anything that's specifically for assessment for APE that's in federal guidelines? And then we'll talk state after that.
Well, I think a good place to start is to think FAB, free appropriate education, and so that holds true too for assessment, is that child is entitled, the parents are entitled to an assessment that's, free and appropriate. So I think that's where you start. I also think that like we talked about earlier, it should be by a multidisciplinary team. I think if you look at the law and you look at IDEA, some of these things haven't changed since the 70s, is that the people that are doing the assessment should have expertise in that area. It shouldn't be to the point where it's at a disadvantage to the child. That's another thing that the law talks about. And so those are good places to start.
The key is that we must, under law, test in all areas the suspected disability, motor being one of them. So when you're asking about legislative and laws and ed code and federal and state and everything else, it's in there that if we have a student that has a disability, we must assessed in all suspected areas of delay. And you can't say, well, they're getting OT or PT, and so we don't need to assess an adapted PE. We should be assessing, we should be taking a look at that domain as well, because we come at it from a different angle as OTs and PTs. So there is law that guides the assessment and guides the timelines for how long you have once you give a permission to assess to get that accomplished for that.
Why, and I don't know if there's a direct answer, why is that not happening often, that APE is not getting assessed in a lot of areas when there should be a suspected delay? And I'm in California, which I know you have strong APE programs here, but in the rest of the country, that's not always the case.
Well, I think the law says physical education, and so where you start is that if there aren't people who have expertise in certain states, then sometimes that's not going to be looked at, and the law really looks at motor, and I think sometimes people who are not as knowledgeable think, okay, motor, like that could be OT, that could be PT. There's a lot of gray area, and the law was designed so that it would be appropriate for all states, and sometimes people interpret things differently. But I think it's up to us. We have to advocate for our field. We have to educate. We have to educate people about, like Kathy is saying, what can we bring to the table as far as this. And so that's how I respond. I think another thing that's often overlooked in the law is that the assessment tool should be look at a battery of test items. It shouldn't be like one single test item that you're administering. So I think that's important, and that's how I would respond to that issue. You know, it's difficult out there sometimes. People are going to interpret things the way that's financially at an advantage for them.
This is Lisa, real quick, just a comment in the practical world. I'm probably going to see a lot of hands raised. How many times have you been forgotten one day before the art? Oh yeah, by the way, we need a full evaluation. Yeah, or by the way, yeah. See,
that's almost all the hands.
Most
by
all
the
the
way.
hands. So we are forgotten. So you have the law up here, what we're supposed to be doing. Then you have one person or two, maybe, whoever the people are in charge, case managers, diagnosticians, whoever, they're in charge of gathering all of us. But we're itinerant, so we're in and out of that building. So that's the real world. And we're forgotten. So the only way we can not be forgotten is communication with the parents, communication with these folks that are the leaders for running these committee meetings. So that's just, we have to switch that, I think, Scott. So yes, we are forgotten many times, but the intentions, I believe, are not, they're not truly doing that because they think they just can't remember all the people that they're supposed to bring to the table. So, and then you have general physical educators that have classes of 80, 90 students, and so one student's having a problem, they're not going to, oh yeah, I forgot there's an APE teacher in this building. So those are the things that I think that we need to be advocates. We need to be advocates. So one quick little thing, I always believe that we should call the parents. We should call the parents. And then that opens such a nice communication, and we can work with them with their child.
I agree with Lisa. I think, it is a collaborative model. It is about communication with the caseworkers and the teachers and having them be able to identify those in a timely manner to you. So that relationship piece is very important. The other issue that we sometimes have is because states look at here in California that physical education is only required in grades 1 through 12, and so then your preschoolers and your transition age kids, they're saying, well, we shouldn't have to have physical education because that's no longer part of their curricular needs based on ed code. So then you have to say, well, we're not only just a designated instructional service, but we're also related. And so if there's an area of need, the law then goes ahead that direction as well. So that is an area where sometimes I know districts are fighting that battle as to whether the preschoolers and the transition kids and even some of the little kinders and TKs are getting assessed in those areas because school districts are saying, well, we don't, the gen ed kids aren't getting physical education, so why would we be doing that for them?
So, to summarize that one word, advocacy. I mean, we can't sit there and wait, oh, nobody called me. We have to advocate and say, and find out when are these meetings going to be. And the veteran teachers know that. They know that sometimes everybody raised their hand in this in the audience, that they're going to get overlooked. That's just a reality. That's why we're such strong advocates for our profession. That's part of your job.
All right. I'm going to jump now to eligibility a little bit, as when we can kind of talk about legislation with that too. Can one of you kind of give me a brief summary of the eligibility process for someone to get APE services? And then I'm going to
Verify a couple of things. Like, one thing I could talk a little bit about is like criteria for eligibility, if that's what you're asking. And so I think one of the things that really plagues us as a profession is there's no like federally mandated criteria for eligibility. There's best practices. There's, if you look at like SHAPE, they have a position statement. If you look at the California AP guidelines, they have best practices as far as, let's say, for example, you're 1.5 standard deviations below on a motor test, or you're in the 7th percentile or below on a norm reference test, or let's say you're looking at developmental milestones, or you're looking at how they do compared to their age group peers, they're 30% or below on a number of items. Those are some best practices, and that's some place you would start with criteria for eligibility. I think too often a lot of people think, okay, this kid's in special ed, they automatically should be referred, or not referred, excuse me, but be in adapted PE, but that's not the case. We need to determine what's the criteria for eligibility, and you need to educate your administrators about those things, and share with them the guidelines, or here are the best practices, the California AP guidelines. But I know there's a lot more to eligibility than that, but that's just that's the one piece.
So this is Marcy, and I helped write the state guidelines for adapted physical education here in California. And when we did this chapter, there was a lot of discussion about the terms eligibility and criteria and qualification. And what was determined at the table with many other adapted PE folks from the state is that a child is eligible or qualifies for special education. And then once under special education, they are eligible for any services under that if the need is there. So we shouldn't be using the term qualify or criteria or eligibility for adapted physical education. It's just if they have a need for that service, it should be there for them. And so our assessment process is there to show what the need is and how they should be able to, what services need to be provided to help them with that area of need. So I know that there's some SELPAs and districts that have some type of criteria written into their SELPA guidelines, but the law is written that there is no eligibility or criteria guidelines for adapted PE. That fell under them receiving special education services. And again, once they're under the special ed umbrella, then we're just looking for areas of need. So then we just need to show where are they best going to meet their needs for physical education.
And just for clarifying for the audience, SELPA is a special education local plan area. So it's a bunch of districts or consortiums that come together that have students that need with special needs, and they're housed under with an administrator, and the finances of the state and everything get funded through that.
Hi, this is Lisa. So I'm in Texas, so we're a little bit different from California because you have a specific certification in adapted PE, correct or no?
We have a credential.
Okay.
We have a credential or an added authorization.
Okay, very good. We don't have that in Texas. So what we take advantage of, which I really enjoy in Texas, is that we do have, I like Marcy just is editing as she's speaking my manual right here, guidelines for the need for APE services. We do have specific guidelines that we follow because we can, if a student is, for example, is functioning on the lower end, and so when we come in as an itinerant, we can work as a team with the teacher and the paraeducator, so maybe we'll check no for APE services from us, but in Texas, the special ed teacher can provide that service in Texas. So in Texas, special ed teachers, physical education teachers, believe it or not, an OT and a PT, and an APE person can provide the services in Texas. It's a strange one, but we're trying to get rid of those, the OT and the PT, but that happens in Texas. So we're more of a consultant. So we're consultant models for the teacher for students at either A or on the higher end that just need a little bit of modification, or on the students on the lower end, but yes, they receive by law physical education in some format. Maybe it's a motor fitness program, but maybe they won't be going to PE. But we have guidelines that we work together collaboratively with the teacher, PE teacher. So we may not be the direct service provider, maybe we're more of a consultative model. Where in other states, the certified states, that they would have to provide their services where we don't have to in Texas.
And also getting back to that, kind of what Marcy was saying, the guidelines are recommended throughout the state. We provide them to all the local educational agencies. But in California, those requirements really do fall to the local education agencies or the districts to make those decisions as to whether or not they're going to enforce them and use them. They're truly guidelines, and they are approved by the California Department of Ed, but they are not enforced as far as a legal piece.
It's something that I've thought about a lot, and I've heard differing opinions on. Is that something that we should try to enforce more, or having those more open guidelines, is that sometimes a good thing?
This is Marcy, and I really think it's a good thing. Because if we had strict guidelines of some type of motor skill performance, then we miss out on those kids who are in general physical education but struggling for other reasons. And so going back to one of our questions earlier about all domains, there are kids that are in general education that we may get a referral for adapted physical education, yet we pull them out and do the skills for a formalized test, and they can do those task-specific skills, but yet when you have them in a general physical education class or even a specially designed physical education class, they're still going to struggle. So having these open guidelines, it allows us to, pull in those kids who need help in other areas.
To reinforce what Marcy's saying is that what's okay.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. All right. So one of the points that I think that gets overlooked is you've got your IEP team, and so if you've got these kids that are in this gray area like we're talking about, that maybe there's behaviors, maybe there's something going on socially, that's where the IEP team can come in. So when you have these strict guidelines like Marcy's saying and they're set that way, then what about those other kids that, from a motor standpoint? And so we shouldn't lose sight of that.
If we have those strict guidelines, though, are we more apt to actually get more kids receiving services that would need it, that might not be getting it? So if we have kids that aren't getting, if we have more strict guidelines, are more schools going to abide by them rather than not really pay attention to it?
Well, we also have to remember that the student has to have been qualified for special education. We have a lot of those kids that do not fall under the one of the 14 different disabilities now or whatever under IDEA, for them to have that ability, which means that if we're providing services to them and everything, then we're encroaching on the general ed funds. So it becomes more of a, into the 504 and the support, and there's a whole other category for that. So we can sometimes go out and work with our general education teachers and provide them with modifications, accommodations, and how to assist those kiddos. But we need to also be really cognizant of the services that we're providing are truly based on the fact that this is a student with special needs.